Robert Howell became our rector in 1967, and he is to date the longest serving rector in our history because he didn't leave till the end of 1990 when he retired. He came, it was the period after Hall left, was kind of, didn't really go too well in the parish. Hall's assistant, George Price, stayed on as acting rector, and he had very many good qualities, but he was not a forceful sort of person. The vestry really kind of got the bit between their teeth, and they made decisions, some of which probably should have been left for a new rector to make. They tried to make changes in the parish office administration, and when Bob Howell came, he immediately got rid of those. And also, the way things came out, sometimes Bob got blamed for decisions that really weren't his. He had been called in March, and he didn't want to come until September. He wanted to stay on in his former parish in Massachusetts until June, and then take 2 months vacation and come to St. Chrysostom's. And the vestry said, no, we want you to come sooner. We want you to come in June, but you can take 2 months vacation anyhow. This was not made known to the congregation, and they thought that the new rector didn't really care about his parish if he could come for a month and then go away for 2 months. And fortunately, in early August, word of this got back to Bob on vacation, and he canceled the rest of his vacation and came back to St. Chrysostom's. Another issue, the church school people were particularly upset about, was that we had had a full-time director of religious education, Martha Prey, and the vestry did not want to keep her on, and I think would not have called as a rector anyone who did want her to stay on. A part of this certainly, I think, was the idea that they didn't care for having a professional woman on the office staff, though that may not have been the entire issue. But Bob told me later years, he said that he did not care for the idea of having a director of religious education because he thought the money could better be spent on a additional part-time priest who could do services. And this decision, many of the people who had taught in the church school under Martha were very disturbed by this and very offended, and stopped teaching, and in some cases left the parish, which for a while left the Sunday school in kind of bad condition. And there was a short period when they didn't have enough teachers and they had to recruit people from Moody Bible Institute. The Howells, however, you could tell when you talked to them that he really was happy to be here, and he wanted to get to know his congregation. And they had a very nice activity that was open to anyone in the parish who was interested. A play reading group where the group read Dorothy Sayers' The Man Born to Be King. And that's was a radio play and had quite a number of episodes. And we would meet every other Sunday evening in the Howells' apartment and would read this. And everybody who took part in it enjoyed it. And I remember there was one woman who you just never would have thought had any kind of talent along these lines, and she just absolutely bowled everybody over when you heard her reading. Just about 6 months after Bob Howell came, we had the first trial use of the liturgy that would become the 1979 prayer book. The book had a green cover and was always referred to as the Green Book, and Bishop Burrell had required that all parishes in the diocese use it for a certain period. And in the middle of 1968, presumably after the trial use period was over, a questionnaire was administered at St. Chrysostom's, and it was people were split about 50-50 whether they liked it or they didn't. And this was the first of several such periods before the 1979 prayer book was actually adopted. Bob also was the first to start the Lessons and Carols service. Now it's nearly always done in Advent, but in '67 we did it on New Year's Eve. And he also introduced the dialogue gospel at Palm Sunday. In 1970, the current 3-year liturgical reading cycle was adopted, and we began to use this on the first Sunday in Advent. And I looked over the bulletin for that service, and it's kind of interesting. It was morning prayer, so we didn't have to have the gospel. And the two lessons that were picked were the Old Testament reading and the epistle, and they didn't use the gospel, which kind of, nowadays you'd always read the gospel, but we didn't at that time. There was a young adult group that I think may have started in the late Hall years, but it was going when Howell came, and they were called the Chris Swingers. And this name was controversial because there was a musical group called the Chris Singers, and they weren't real happy to have this group, the Chris Swingers. And it at the report at one of the annual meetings, they said, the president said it was a social organization for young adults in the near north area, and the core members attend St. Chrysostom's regularly, but it's not a religious organization as such. But the goal was to create something that gives substance to the life of the young adults living in the area. And we have some information on the topics of some of their meetings: abortion, Playboy philosophy in the church, the death of God theology, and they brought a speaker in who was a minister to the hippie community. When Howell had come to St. Chrysostom's, he was best known for his work beginning the fish lay ministry in his parish in Massachusetts. This had originated in a church in England, and the idea was that it was to provide neighborly services to people who needed them. You could call fish and could get an emergency babysitter for your children, or get someone to drive you someplace, or if you were visually handicapped, you could get someone to read to you. There were all kinds of possibilities of this there would be a phone line that you'd call, and the calls would be screened and then referred on, and volunteers either served for one 24-hour period during a month or offered to do special services. After about 6 or 8 months, I guess, the vestry okayed starting this, and Bob had come to Chicago, really accepted the call with the hope that he could start this on a broader basis than his small community in Massachusetts. And they had an organizational meeting in late March, and then a few days later, Bob preached on the concept. Bob got a lot of national publicity on this, and he was a contestant on To Tell the Truth. Apparently they had 3 people on, and you had to decide which of the 3 was the real founder of fish. And he was on the Today Show. And so this began in the 1968. There were some great stories about this. One of them, a volunteer on duty got a call on a weekend, and this family, the heat had gone off in the winter in this family's building, and the volunteer was just calling up all over the place trying to get someone to come and fix it and do something, and it took hours, but finally ended up with some office of the city of Chicago who did come forward and get the heat restored to the building. And another story about some woman who was feeling kind of depressed and had a doctor's appointment, and first she called for a someone to take her to it, and then she was apparently decided that her life wasn't worth it or something, and she called to say no, they didn't need to take her, and she didn't have any family. And the volunteer said, you do have a family, I'm part of your family, and took the woman to her doctor. We'd been using the parish house. The parish house had been used by a number of outside groups, and Bob Howell continued to do this, and started, and this lasted for many years. It's only quite recently that they moved it, but the polling place used to be here at St. Chrysostom's. And in spring 1968, outside users of the parish house included 3 AA groups, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, groups playing volleyball and basketball, and many diocesan groups. And given the parish's low church history, it's quite interesting that one of the groups that met there was the American Church Union, a very Anglo-Catholic organization. Bob Howell introduced at St. Chrysostom's something that he had started in his former parish, which was blessing the animals. Now, a number of parishes do it, and they usually do it in the fall at the Sunday nearest to St. Francis Day, but in the 60s this hadn't yet caught on very much, and Bob picked Rogation Sunday, the Sunday before the Ascension, when you pray for the fields and animals. And so he scheduled this blessing of the animals. His son Patrick, at Bob's funeral, told me something that I had not known, and that Bob had started this because Patrick had just got a dog, and he wanted to take her everywhere, and he wanted to take her to church. And she couldn't go to church regularly, but Bob thought, well, it would be nice to have something when Lucy could be taken to church at least once. And so he started this blessing. And don't think they were actually ever brought into the church for the service, but afterwards they were out in the courtyard. And Bob would come out on the outdoor pulpit and would say a prayer and a blessing for the animals there. And we had a member of the vestry at that time who was very publicity-minded, and he got the TV cameras on it, and also we would have couple of mounted police would ride to have their horses blessed. People from the Lincoln Park Children's Zoo would bring animals down, and it nearly always would get both newspaper and TV coverage. And one year, even the group walked to North Avenue Beach to bless the fish in the sea. And that one, I remember I was in the group that walked down there, and they had the TV cameras on, and that evening I got a call from one of my aunts who said, "Oh, I saw you on TV today." 1968 was, of course, a year of violence in the city that no one who lived through that time will forget. After Martin Luther King's assassination, there had been rioting in April, and Assistant George Price led a discussion of the U.S. Riot Commission report on the events. And of course there was strong polarization on the Vietnam War issue. Bob Howell supported this and felt that the people who were in favor of the war weren't getting enough chance to speak, and he arranged for a military person to come and speak to the women of St. Chrysostom's. There was discussion of possible use of the church in case it was needed at the time of the Democratic National Convention. Bob was still on vacation when the convention began, and as soon as he heard that rioting was breaking out, he cut short his vacation and flew back to Chicago. And he approved use of the church basement by medical and first aid workers to care for injured demonstrators. This did not sit well with a number of the vestry who thought, we shouldn't do anything for these radicals. And Bob, a week or so after the convention was over, preached a sermon which was reprinted in the Living Church, and he took as his text, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And his view was, yes, we are our brother's keeper. And whether we agree with the views of the demonstrators or not, Bob certainly did not. These are people in need, and we must take care of their needs and not consider whether they agree with us or not. Now, in 1969, in the fall of 1969, there was another demonstration when the Chicago 8 were about to come to trial, and this whole group of people massed at the south end of Lincoln Park and ran down the streets just south of the park, including Dearborn, just throwing stones in every window that they passed by. And one of the faces in the Te Deum window in the back of the church was broken as a result. And it did not have a permanent loss because the parish wrote to Connick Associates, the firm that had designed the glass, and the head of a figure of one of the Holy Innocents had been broken, and they sent a new small panel with this piece, and you can spot it because the face color is just slightly different from the original. And I often wonder if any of the people who were throwing the stones, they probably didn't even know what they were throwing them at, but if they knew that some of the injured demonstrators had been cared for at St. Chrysostom's. In the fall of 1968, there was a short-term tutoring program, which was the predecessor of a program that lasted considerably longer. Barrett College in Lake Forest had sponsored a program for teenage girls in the inner city to prepare them for college, and we, I think, provided the space and didn't do much else. The tutors apparently were provided by the Junior League, but there was considerable interest in this idea, and about 9 years later, in 1977, the parish began tutoring program first for high school students, and then for 1 year, and then later for working with the staff at Schiller School in Cabrini Green, a program for tutoring younger kids, and this continued for nearly 20 years. The 1969 annual meeting was probably the most important in the history of the parish. The senior warden was retiring. The junior warden had already moved out of the city, and they had not filled the vacancy. So for the first time in the history of the parish, two wardens were to be elected. At that time, the nominating committee was consisted of the retiring vestry, and they, I think, possibly reacting to the events relating to the Democratic Convention, the vestry members were quite acceptable, but the two wardens, the senior warden was a man who, when we had been in the early 60s considering how we could reach out to residents of Sandburg Village, said, well, you shouldn't try to welcome everybody. And the junior warden was a very nice man who had a summer home in Michigan and was almost never at St. Chrysostom's on Sunday because he always went there for the weekend. And he had no idea of the various issues involved, and had just said he would do it because he felt he ought to do what he could for the church. And normally, the names were not disclosed until the actual meeting took place, but other members of the vestry got word of the choices and were horrified and started calling members of the congregation, and the dissident group selected other candidates who were to run at the meeting. There's a great deal of tension, I remember, at the meeting, and my mother was doing altar guild after the service, and she heard this applause, and she came in and she said, "Oh, well, have they? Who did they elect?" And I laughed and I said, "They didn't elect anybody. Everybody was just applauding the work of Bob Lodine as organist," which was something I think everybody felt they could agree on. And when the vote was taken, the official slate had not been elected, and the two men that had been proposed by the dissident vestry were elected, and they were very well qualified. The senior warden had been confirmed in 1940 and had been active in his parish in Highland Park before moving to Chicago about 10 years before. The junior warden was a younger man than most of the vestry and quite active in the church, and something that we did not know until many years later was that he was the first cousin of the first President George Bush. And I saw that when Bush died and the funeral, I saw that this man is still living, and he took some kind of part in the service. The National Black Economic Development Conference in the spring of 1969 adopted what it called the Black Manifesto, demanding reparations from white churches and synagogues, and calling for sit-ins and telling the whites that they should practice nonviolence as they had been advising black people to do. And at a special General Convention of the Episcopal Church in August, the group rejected reparations but supported minority group self-determination and voted to raise money for the BEDC. The vestry and Robert Howell were not happy about this, and they expressed strong opposition and had drafted a very strong resolution on the issue, but didn't have a quorum at the meeting. And Bishop Burrell came to the next meeting of the vestry and talked to the group, and they appreciated what he said, and they adopted a much less strong resolution. And one thing that was I was very pleased about was that this did not have any overall impact on our relationship with the diocese. And Bob remembered something that his father had said, that the church is like your family. You don't walk out on it if you disagree with his actions. And I think I did not mention that Bob was the first rector at St. Chrysostom's who had not been born an Episcopalian. His family were Baptists. And he had also worked in merchandising for some years before he attended seminary. At this time, one good thing that happened was that we were beginning to have African Americans in the parish. And one woman who started coming at this time was Adassa Brown, and she was the caretaker for an elderly woman who lived on Lakeshore Drive. And the first time that she came, she said people were very nice and they spoke to her at coffee hour, but she told me this many years later. She said, "I didn't see anyone else of my color there, and I wondered if I should come back. but I tried it once. And the second time I came back, people came up to me and said, "Oh, we're so glad to see you again." And I knew they really did want me to come. And she remained in the parish for nearly 40 years and was very much beloved by everyone. Funny story about her from the later years when we had the first Sunday suppers. She came from Jamaica, and one of our parishioners used to make a rum cake. And so, and one of her visits to Jamaica, she brought some good Jamaican rum back and was going to give it to him. And it disappeared by the end of the evening, and we didn't know what happened, and couldn't find it anywhere in the guild room or where the coats were being hung. And the next Monday, it turned up, and it had got into one of the cribs in the parish nursery. And it was retrieved and given to the recipient, who said that the rum was so strong he had to put a little less of it in the rum cake than he usually would have done. Nice event took place in November 1969. The founding date of the church in 1893, Bob Howell had arrived only a short time before, and there had not been time to plan any observance of the event. But the first service on this present site had been the first Sunday in November 1894, so that was adopted as the 75th anniversary date. And Joanna Zander, a member of the parish, retired teacher, was asked to write a history of the parish. And as she was going through the documents, one thing that she discovered that just about everyone had forgotten was that the church had never been consecrated. And when Bob Howell and the vestry heard about this, they thought this would be a great way to celebrate the 75th anniversary. And they checked with the diocesan bishops to see if one of them could attend, but as it turned out, the calendar had been made up for the year and neither one was free. But then somebody very happily recalled that retired Bishop Stark might possibly want to perform the consecration, and this was really an excellent choice because he had one of the times when they had considered consecrating the church was when he was rector, and so now everything was all set and he could come back for the occasion. And the large silver cross with the moonstones, someone had given the moonstones to the parish a bit earlier, and a donor had given the large silver processional cross. And this arrived just in time to be able to be used at the consecration service. Bishop Stark preached on Jesus' prayer from John 17 and touching on themes of glory and consecration and Jesus showing justice, mercy, love, and humility. And he told a very nice story. In retirement, he was serving as the rector of a very small parish in York Harbor, Maine. And after the service, one time, he There wasn't an acolyte, so he put the candles out, and someone said to him afterward, "Old bishops never die, they just put out the candles." And in keeping with our Low Church tradition, we did not celebrate the Eucharist at this service, which now surprises me considerably, but which didn't seem to cause any difficulty at the time. When George Price left to take another position, we called a part-time assistant, man named David Moss, who had been a seminarian in the parish and was now ordained a deacon and working toward a doctorate at the University of Chicago. And he did quite a number of study programs, and when he was a seminarian, he had written a youth dialogue sermon on the prodigal son, and he had study groups on contemporary literature and the theater of the absurd, and a couple of years later contributed prayers recorded them for Dial-a-Prayer. And he was ordained as a priest at St. Chrysostom's in April 70. It took a little longer to find a full-time assistant, but Reverend Edgar Shippey joined the parish in February 1970 and was given special responsibility for the young adults. And he planned a skiing excursion, and he planned for a sunrise service at 6:15 at North Avenue Beach on Easter morning. Easter was very early that year, and he'd come from the Diocese of Arkansas, and I remember thinking, I don't think he knows what Chicago weather could be like on Easter Sunday, and indeed they had the 6:15 service, but they had to have it in the church. He was very popular with the young adults, but he was alcoholic, and after about 2 months in the parish, Bob had to dismiss him. And 2.5 years later, at a vestry meeting, one just after Thanksgiving, Bob read a letter that Shippey had written to him thanking him, and he said that the dismissal had made him actually face up to the issue of his alcoholism, and he was currently in San Francisco employed by AA and working part-time as an assistant at a parish there. And at the 1976 General Convention, there was something in the church magazine coverage of this, and he and his wife, he was by this time at a parish outside San Francisco, but in Northern California. They had a liturgical dance group in the parish, and the group performed at General Convention. So it was very good that things worked out that way. The replacement for Shippey came a year later, Reverend John Haas. He had been born a Lutheran and had been studying in a Lutheran seminary, but had worked with Reverend Peter Powell at the St. Augustine Center for American Indians, and was very impressed by him and by the Episcopal Church. And he became an Episcopalian and switched from the Lutheran seminary and graduated from Nashotah House. He managed better than Harlan Weitzel, our previous rector, the previous assistant who had graduated from Neshota House, he got on quite well at St. Chrysostom's. He was married, had a baby son about a year old, and when he would celebrate the Wednesday morning Eucharist, they would both come to the service with him. And I remember once there was a reading about something about if anyone has anything to say about this, let them speak. And the little boy cried out, "Da!" just as though he knew what was going on. And he had responsibility for the young adults. And when they had been the Chris Swingers, it was, they said, not a religious group as such. Well, that definitely changed under John Hawes. They had a strong spiritual orientation, and they were also concerned with service and fellowship. They'd meet every Sunday evening. They'd have evening prayer followed by dinner and work on various projects. And one day a week they'd meet to say Compline and pray for the parish. And they had a silent retreat, I think more than one, at DeKoven Center in Racine. And a couple of members of that group are still in the parish, Mary Ellen Christie and Judy Bross. And two of the members of the group later went on to become Episcopal priests. The big activity that this group was known for was the medieval festival. They started that in spring of 1972, and it was on a Friday, always on a Friday night or a Saturday, and they'd begin with a service in the church done in medieval style, and that meant that it included incense. And one longtime parishioner walked out. She was horrified, and then she laughed afterward, and she said, "Well, I should have realized that they're doing this because they want to do it in medieval style, and this doesn't mean they're going to introduce incense in the church on a regular basis." But after the service, then there would be something kind of program, a brief program in the church, and people would read or do something with a medieval theme, and then you'd go up to the guild room, and a medieval dinner would be served, no forks, lots of wine and mead. And there were sometimes a court jester would come out and perform, and the evening would they always picked a lord of the manor from one of the guests who was attending, who was to preside. And at the end of the evening, there would always be a toast to the saints in alphabetical order. And by this time, with all the wine and the mead, I don't think they ever got very far in the alphabet. But it was very, very popular, and the young adults enjoyed giving it, and the people in the congregation enjoyed attending. By 1969, the diocese allowed women to serve on vestries and to be delegates to the diocesan convention. And at some diocesan convention or diocesan event with delegates, they had to have something that had to be at St. Chrysostom's for some reason, and women from St. Chrysostom's were pouring coffee after the meeting, while many of the other women there had served as delegates. And there were a couple of candidates on the vestry, women candidates on the vestry slate, but they were never elected. There would always be someone nominated from the floor, and usually quite a well-qualified person who would take away votes from other candidates, and it was always the woman that didn't get elected. In 1971, my mother was named a delegate to diocesan convention, and in 1972, she was on the slate as a vestry member for filling out a 2-year vacancy. And this, everybody liked her, and I remember when she told me that they had nominated her, I remember thinking, well, why didn't somebody think of this sooner? Because here's the one person in the congregation, man or woman, that no one is going to vote against. And she did get elected, and she served on the property committee, and she was also a delegate to the convention the year that Bishop Primo was elected suffragan bishop. And I remember she, before the convention, there was a candidates meeting, and I remember her saying afterward, well, I know who is going to be elected. It's going to be the African-American priest from outside the diocese, because he had just been very simple in answering his questions and had just, and I think all the delegates from the parish that St. Chrysostom's had originally thought that it was another man they would support, but that Bishop Primo was so good that they couldn't vote for anyone else. Mother work on the vestry did not cause very much comment. What did cause comment was that the vestry, always with the ushers, would pass out the, take up the offering, pass out the collection plates, and then bring them up to the front of the church after the offertory. And people used to say to me, oh, aren't you proud of your mother? She looks so cute going up the aisle. And we just used to laugh at that. And once we had a visitor from St. Augustine's College in North Carolina, African-American man, and he saw Mother and he said, oh, well, I see your church is very progressive. You have women taking up the collection. And Mother and I laughed afterward and said that was a lot better than saying that she looked cute. And the first time that she did this, she was very nervous, and she went up, and one of the vestry nudged her as they're standing there and says out of the corner of his mouth, we've got to do something about your hair. And my mother wore her hair long, and it was in a bun, and she thought maybe a hairpin had fallen out, there was a loose strand of hair. But then he went on, you're the only person up here that isn't bald. And with the women on the vestry taking up the collection, the Ushers Guild could realized it could no longer stay as an all-male group, and a year or so later added its first woman member. Both John Haas and David Moss left St. Chrysostom's in 1973. Moss had finished his degree and was offered a position at Lutheran General Hospital. And John Haas had always wanted to study moral theology at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland. And he got the opportunity to do this, and someone he knew outside the church was willing to pay part of the cost, and so he left in June '73. The new assistant, the Reverend Joseph Kerr, came in the fall and was ordained to the priesthood at St. Chrysostom's. And one thing that he did a lot of work on while he was there, he and Mary Ellen Christie worked, he was a strong supporter of her plans to start up the day school. And this, of course, has been an extremely successful school, and I think parents of many of the children have ended up coming to St. Chrysostom's, and Mary Ellen was principal of the day school for over 40 years, until only about a year and a half or so ago. So this can be put down as a credit on Kerr's side, but he was not really suited to a large urban parish, and he was separated from his wife, was having personal difficulties, and he ended up, he resigned in early 1975, not on the best terms with the congregation. He gave a farewell sermon, and he picked out the names of several people that he thought had done good work, including Mary Ellen, but the implication was that nobody else had done so. And the man who came as his replacement was the Reverend James Arnold, who had been for a couple of years at least assistant at a parish in the East. A part-time assistant was added to the parish staff Jim Arnold came in June, and Bill Sachs came as part-time assistant in September, and he had come from the Diocese of Virginia, where he had been ordained by Robert Hall, and now wanted to study for a degree at University of Chicago, and he was given responsibility for the education programs, both for children and adults. And he had some really good Sunday morning adult study programs. And Jim Arnold came up with the idea of a parish association, including representatives from a large number of groups, and it would offer a variety of service, social, and religious opportunities. There would be small group meetings of various kinds, house Eucharists, young adults, and so on. And the vestry approved this idea, and Arnold also came up with an idea for the parish Lenten programs, which continued for many years after he left. You began with a worship service. I think sometimes it was the Eucharist, sometimes evening prayer. Then you would have dinner, and it would be a dinner prepared by a group in the parish, and be not a very Lenten, simple type of meal, and a speaker followed that. Jim Arnold was in a minor automobile accident over the Thanksgiving weekend, and suffered whiplash injury, and was given medication to treat the pain. It was a preparation for Christmas, as always, was very busy. The young adults were had planned a sale where grapefruit would be brought from Texas or Florida and available for gifts, and the grapefruit had not arrived on time. There were various stresses, and there were issues in his personal life as well, and to the great shock and sorrow of the congregation, he went up to the top of one of the Michigan Avenue hotels on the day after Christmas, jumped off, and committed suicide, which was really stunned everyone. And I remember Bob preaching a very moving sermon and saying that, well, we know that Jim was baptized and we can trust that the situation, trust him into the Lord's hands. And many years later, he was married with twin sons who were about a year and a half old at the time, and many years later, when the sons were in their 20s, one of them came to Chicago. I think the remainder of the family moved to Oregon, and he was put in touch with me and wanted to talk about his father, and I was able to tell him about how the parish association and about the Lenten programs, and give a little background on the reason the suicide. Had been depression in the family, and Bob later said if he'd known that, he might have been a little more hesitant to hire him, because Chicago is could be such a pressure situation. So we had another vacancy for assistant, and Bob didn't have to do much searching, because the Reverend Scott Helferty, who was the assistant at the Church of the Ascension, wanted to come to St. Chrysostom's, and he had spoken with Father Norris, the rector at Ascension, who said that was all right, and they discussed it, and so in the spring, Helferty came and joined the parish staff. By the mid-1970s, more lay participation in the service, and in about 1976, Bob Howell founded the Lectors Guild, and this has always been a very popular ministry, and people really wanted to sign up, and from the very beginning both men and women were members. And we used to have very good training programs. If you were a member of the group, you were expected to attend a training session once a year, and all the people, we'd meet in the church, and everybody would sit in different parts of the parish. And then you could pick a reading of your choice from the lectionary, and you'd get up to the lectern and you'd read it. And then if you couldn't be heard in some part of the church, people would raise their hands so you would know this. And Bob Howell would give tips on reading, and one thing I remember that he used to say was that you don't read it like you're reading the telephone directory, but you also don't put so much into it and make it seem like you've written it yourself. In 1976, the General Convention was to discuss the ordination of women, and this was of particular interest to one member of the congregation, a woman named Janice Gordon, who had when she first came to St. Chrysostom, she was a flight attendant for Pan American, and she had got in touch with the parish through Fish, and she had started to volunteer, and a St. Chrysostom's volunteer spoke to her, and she had come from England. She had a very English accent, and this woman said, well, I can tell from your accent that you're probably a member of the Church of England. You should come to services at St. Chrysostom's as well as taking part in Fish, which she did. And she became very active in the young adults. And as time went on, she realized that she was feeling a call to the ordained ministry. And she hadn't completed college, but she was able to finish up her college degree by taking courses at Northwestern while still working as a flight attendant. Then Pan Am was having financial problems and were cutting back on people, and she said, well, if I resigned, would that mean that someone else would be able to be kept on? And they said yes, so she did. And she was hired to be in charge of the church school, and the parish let her have space in the parish house and live there. And by early 1976, she was at the point where she was to, the vestry were to vote on her candidacy. And the minutes say that there were various opinions on women's ordination were expressed, but the group unanimously endorsed her as a candidate. And a few months later, General Convention did approve women priests, and Bob Howell had been strongly supportive of this and was very pleased at the result. Janice was ordained as a deacon at St. Chrysostom's in June 1979. She did her seminary work at U of C and at Seabury. And after she was ordained, she was assistant at St. Augustine's Wilmette. And the following year was one of 4 women ordained in the first ordination of women at the cathedral. And the vote in favor of women's ordination had a impact on former assistant John Haas, who had we had all known when he was at St. Chrysostom's that he was extremely conservative. He was strongly opposed to abortion, for instance, and he did not agree with the decision to ordain women. And after a few months, there was a story in the paper which with the somewhat misleading headline, Episcopal priest to become Catholic. It didn't say Roman Catholic, but he did leave the church, and as I understand it, he was married, by this time had several children, and was not going to be able to go on as a Roman Catholic priest, but that he became head of some very prestigious Catholic think tank organization. 1976 was also the year that what was to have been the first of 2 votes on the revised prayer book took place. And this was much less controversial than might have been expected, and the vote in favor was so large that it was obvious that in 3 years later it would receive the necessary second approval, and the church allowed congregations to begin using the new book before then, and we bought our first copies of the new book in early 1977. And Bob Howell was really concerned that the transition goes smoothly, and Bob Lodine, who was our organist, said, oh, we should get red books because they'd look so nice in the pews. And Bob Howell didn't want to do this because the previous books had been black, and he thought that might caused some difficulty, and Bob Lodine was very pleased because Bob Howell bought him his own copy, and he bought it and read. But the Sunday after Easter, 1977, April 17th, first use of the 1979 book. And at the beginning, we tried to conform as much as possible to the 1928 book. We had a really good adult program on introducing the new prayer book, which was conducted by Scott Helferty and Bill Sachs. And they came from different perspectives because Scott was more high church and Bill was more low church. And they explained the reasons for the changes, and they were strong supporters of the new book. But what I think made people more willing to accept what they had to say was that each of them had things that they didn't care for, and they didn't hesitate to mention them. This program went on about 6 weeks, and I know people who were in it who had been first been very concerned about what the service was going to be like, came away and were just felt very different about it. And they had a similar program again in the fall. The one thing that some of the special services, they didn't have versions in Rite 1, and that included baptism. And the first baptism at a service took place in May 1977, just a few weeks after we'd started using the new book. And the 1979 service got very, very positive reactions from the congregation. I remember in the coffee hour afterward, people were just saying, "Oh, wasn't that wonderful? And isn't this a great improvement?" And at some later point, they switched over for 6 weeks to Rite 2, but most of the congregation favored Rite 1. We'd replaced the organ at St. Chrysostom's in 1953, but by the mid-70s it was beginning to give problems, and the possibility of replacing it was discussed at vestry meetings. And Bob Lodine thought that the parish should get a Moller organ, M-O-L-L-E-R. This was very prestigious name at the time, and the cost was going to be little under $250,000, and by early 1978, they'd had several big donations and started a campaign for others in the congregation to join in. And on the last Sunday that the old organ was there, they had a special hymn sing in the evening, and everybody could request the hymns they wanted to sing, and then it was taken out. And Bob Lodine said instead of getting a replacement organ, he said he would just use the piano from the Harding room for the few months until the new organ came. And it was installed in March, and they dedicated it at a concert in April, and had brought in an organist. Now, unfortunately, and this will come up in later history, unfortunately, Mahler very popular in the late 70s, had used new materials that did not stand up to the test of time. Late 70s were a rather difficult financial period for the congregation. There were a lot of repairs needed to the building, and they couldn't meet them from the budget. The rector had since about 1930 lived in an apartment on Astor Street that the church had first had rented, and then when the building went co-op, they bought it. And to raise money, they sold the apartment, and Bob Howell had to move. At first he was in Sandburg Village until they renovated space for him in the rectory. Cost of the repairs could not be met from the budget, so they had to plan a capital campaign, and we could also no longer have both a full-time and a part-time assistant. What happened was that just at the time when Bill Sachs would have had to leave the congregation, Scott Helferty accepted a call to Oregon, which was where he had originally come from. And so Bill stayed on as full-time rector, but about a year later accepted a call to return to Virginia. He left in summer of 1980, and the retired priest who had been head of the church home, now Montgomery Place, on the south side, filled in as assistant for several months. And in 1981, George Hull became the new assistant. He was just graduated from Virginia Seminary. He was older. He had worked in business for some time before that. His wife, Jean, also worked, and he would not accept the call until he found out that she could transfer to the Chicago office of IBM for whom she worked. And he had been ordained a deacon before he came to St. Chrysostom's, but his ordination was held at St. Chrysostom's. His middle name was Andrew, and the ordination service was held on the 29th of November, the eve of the feast of St. Andrew. By summer of 1981, a lot of work going on in the church interior, and it could be done much more rapidly if the church the interior was not used for services. And for about 2 months, we had our services in the guild room. And it was a hot summer, and Bob Howell used to say every Sunday when you'd come there, now be sure and wear light, comfortable clothes in the circumstances. The people in vestments couldn't do this, and they said it was pretty uncomfortable. And I remember hearing him say this, and then we're going on to do a service of the Eucharist using Rite One with all the Elizabethan language. And I said to Bob a few days later, I said, "Doesn't it seem strange to you, when we're supposed to be dressing so casually, to be using this service with all the Elizabethan language?" And he said, "You know, that's a very interesting comment." And he said, but I don't really like right one morning prayer. And I said, well, I hadn't noticed it so much in morning prayer, but I did notice it in the Eucharist. And he didn't say what he was going to do about it, but the next time there was a 11 a.m. Eucharist, then here he's using right too, and apparently didn't get a lot of negative feedback. By the end of September, they're able to move back into the church, and they have a special service of rededication. We're using elements from the Rite to service for consecration of a church. And for the 75th anniversary, when the church was consecrated, they didn't use the Eucharist, but at this service they did. One thing introduced in the 70s that continued for a considerable length of time were the house Eucharists. At first this was a young adult activity, but by later in the 70s they were held monthly, and the entire congregation was invited, and you brought a food item serving 6 or a bottle of wine. And the bulletin always had a statement, please be assured that Kentucky Fried Chicken or Division Street Pizza is as welcome as a gourmet specialty. And there was no, you didn't know how many people would show. You didn't know what kind of food was going to be brought, but nearly always they had selections. It was not all desserts or all main dishes. Nearly always there was a good range of types of food, and people from the various services would attend, and you'd get to talk to people that you didn't otherwise have much contact with. The late 70s, early 80s were the period when my parents died, and there was a while when I hadn't been getting to a lot of activities except the Sunday service. And I remember going for the first time to a house Eucharist, and there weren't very many people that I had known at this group, but it was so friendly and so welcoming. And after that, I just made a point of coming whenever I could. Bob Howell and George Hull worked very well together, and George remained as a first assistant and then associate throughout the Howell years. And as the young adult group from the 70s aged, instead of starting a new young adult group, George changed the name of the group and just called it the Adult Fellowship. And there were they'd have the monthly house Eucharists, and then sometimes there were Sunday night suppers with programs. I remember an oncologist in the parish giving a particularly good talk about cancer and cancer treatments. And we would have mid-1980s, the group would schedule retreats at the Roman Catholic Retreat House, the Cenacle, on Fullerton Avenue. And the nuns in residence would conduct them. The first one I remember, there were about 12 people there, and the only married couple in the group were the Hulls, and the rest were all, for various reasons, single, and the nun who had planned the program had taken marriage as the theme, and the following year when the retreat was being planned, we had a committee, and the woman who was to give it met with us, and it was more geared to the group's choice. And they were always be Friday night till Sunday noon, and it would be pretty much silent after the Friday meal until Sunday. The early 80s, it was a bad economic time, and there were a number of people in the congregation who had lost jobs. And as it turned out, other people in the congregation sometimes mentioned that jobs were available, and it happened that by chance someone who was going to lose a job was just happened to be talking to this person, and they said, oh, there's something opening up in my company, and this person did get the job, and Bob asked people to, if they needed jobs or had them available, please to let the office know, and they called it St. Chrysostom's Helpline. And some years later, this became formalized and became the Employment Council. Bob Lodine had been our organist since 1962, and he was diabetic, and by the early 80s was beginning to have kidney problems, and by early 1983 had to take an extended leave of absence. And I remember Bob telling me that he could ask Bob Lodine to resign, but that he thought he was really no longer strong enough to manage at the organ. And Bob Lodine did realize this, and in the fall he resigned, and they had a reception in his honor. And a committee from the parish started checking around for a new organist, and the man that was chosen was Richard Hoskins, who the appointment was announced in early 1984, and so he has celebrated earlier this year his 35th anniversary in the parish. One activity that started in the 80s that remained on the parish calendar for a good number of years. In early 1983, a couple from the South African Missionary Society, who were associated with the Episcopal Church affiliate in Chile, came to St. Chrysostom's, and later that spring we had a benefit brunch and auction for their group. And the first one of these was held at the church, and we had a brunch in the guild room, and we had auction items. But after that, it was moved to the racket club, and a number of different groups benefited. And would be after the 11 o'clock service, and you'd go over, and there'd be a whole room at the racket club with silent auction items, and then a live auction after the brunch. And man who's still a parishioner here now, John Fornengo, he is the world's greatest auctioneer, and he could get going on some of these live auction items. And one time he has a husband and a wife bidding against each other for the same item. And he just I think the one that was the most successful was I believe the year was 1989, and the diocese had just started up an AIDS ministry program, and this was to benefit that. And this I remember because I made a donation which turned out to be a very good deal for me. My mother had graduated from the University of Chicago, and she had bought plates with pictures of the buildings on it. There was a set of either 8 or 12 that she had bought, and I thought, you know, I once took a summer school course at the University of Chicago, but that's not reason enough for me to keep these plates, and maybe they could use them at the brunch auction. Well, it turned out that the value had highly increased, and I got this nice tax write-off, and the the winning bidder was a couple, and he was on the U of C board, and so these were actually used often at events involving people from the university, and I just always was so pleased with that. That was a real win-win situation, and that carried on for many years and only came to a stop after the economic problems of 2008. New member of the parish came to St. Chrysostom's in the mid-1970s, a man named Oliver Campeau, who was a French teacher at Latin school, and became very active at St. Chrysostom's. He was to retire in, I think, 1986, and Bishop Griswold was beginning a program for training deacons, and Bob spoke to Ollie and he said, have you thought about this as something that you could do in retirement? And Ollie did give it consideration and did go on with it. He was unfortunately only lived 3 years after this. One of the things he always did was a Sunday Bible study between the services, and he had been supposed to be going somewhere on the Saturday night it was to meet a friend there, and he hadn't showed up, and the friend got his building to check on him, and he had died of a heart attack while preparing for his Bible readings for the Sunday. The next Sunday were opened up, and there was a glass of red wine on the table by him, and he had just been called home, and we really felt we're very sad about that. The Dearborn Garden Walk began back in the Bob Hall years, and we have participated in some way in the walk nearly every year. In the 60s, there was a singing group would sometimes perform in the courtyard, and so when it was now they charge more and don't have all the special. They used to have music playing in the street and whatnot, and now they don't do that, and they concentrate more on gardens, but we still have the church open to visitors, and we'll have a carillon recital. Bob Howell was nearly always away during at the time of the garden walk, but there was one year when he was going to be in town, and he jokingly said that what he'd like to do was to have a booth like Lucy and Peanuts that said psychiatric help 5 cents. And a member of the congregation actually did construct a booth, and it had the sign psychiatric help 5 cents, and then Bob put a little note below the sign saying, "Lucy isn't here, can Bob help?" And he got his picture in the Tribune for it, and he said afterward that several people had stopped to talk to him and that they were not it didn't feel like they had wanted to go and consult somebody on a more formal basis, but they were glad to talk to him in that particular setting. From the very beginning of the parish, it had been morning prayer every Sunday at 11 o'clock, except for the first Sunday of the month when it was, in the earlier years we would have called it Holy Communion. When the 1979 prayer book came in, we referred to it as the Eucharist. But for the first time in our history, in 1988, in the fall, Bob Howell started having a Eucharist on the third Sunday. He wanted, at that time, the church school was at 11 o'clock, and he wanted a service that they could attend and that would be designed to be more child-friendly. And so in the fall, he introduced this service, and it was a good time to schedule baptisms, and so a lot of the time the service would begin with the baptismal office, but if it didn't, then we would do what is allowed in the 1979 prayer book, was to begin the service and have morning prayer as the service of the word rather than the prelude to the Eucharist. And I think it was at this time that we started moving, we moved in a table from elsewhere in the parish house, and at that service, instead of celebrating at the high altar, it was done at the holy table, and the sacrament that was administered at stations, and you came up the steps and you didn't go back to the high altar. This was not extremely well received by the congregation, but the issue was not that the Eucharist was being celebrated more often. It was that they didn't like the child-friendly service, but it continued throughout Howell's tenure. We'd had African American in the congregation since the late 1960s, and in the early 1980s, Larry Green began attending services at St. Chrysostom's, and he became the first African American who was elected to the vestry, and that was in 1990. And he will go on, and in the Webster years I will mention this, that he has ordination as a deacon. In late 1989, Bob sent a letter to the congregation saying that he was going to retire at the end of the year 1990. So 1990 was his, so to speak, farewell year. And when the stewardship banquet came in the fall, the choir put on a program of the rector's favorite operatic arias and popular songs, and it ended up with everybody at the dinner singing "I've Grown Accustomed to Your Face." Bob had been the only rector to serve over 20 years, and they'd had celebrations on his 10th, 15th, and 20th anniversary. The 10th, I think, was just a reception after the service at 11 o'clock. The 15th was also a reception, but some couple in the congregation who were members of the Saddle and Cycle Club arranged for a surprise dinner for him and got both the diocesan bishops and a lot of lay people in the congregation to come, and they took Bob to dinners. It was just thinking that he was to have dinner with the two of them, and then came in and this whole group saying, "Surprise, surprise." The 20th anniversary, they revived the old medieval festival, and his 20th anniversary was the 25th anniversary for Bishop Montgomery, and he was going to retire later in that year, so they had a joint celebration, and they did the medieval festival. And I particularly remember this because some person in attendance had rented a cardinal's costume for the occasion. And when Bob finally came to retire in 1990, they had the medieval festival again. They had evensong, then they had a reception in the Harding Room, and then they had the medieval dinner, and a purse was presented to the rector, and they had a farewell program with speeches. Looking back when Bob Howell retired, people from the congregation noted his thought-provoking sermons and his fine sense of humor, compassionate pastoral ministry, and said that he had a joyful but no-nonsense approach. His sermons often related the gospel message to current issues facing the congregation, and he would never allow people to keep copies of his sermons because he said they were for one occasion and did not necessarily apply at a later time, but they were highly praised by the congregation. And as a pastor, he, perhaps it had something to do with the fish lay ministry, he was very much concerned about small issues that people might be facing. I remember when my mother died, and he was talking about all the things that needed to be talked about, and he said, "Are you going to want to have for dinner the same meal that you had planned to have? Because you might want something different, and if so, let's go over to there was a Jewel right around the corner from me at that time. Let's go over and you can buy something." And he paid for the groceries, and I reimbursed him later. And other people told similar stories. One woman said her mother had died out of the city, and Bob asked how she was going to get there, and showed considerable concern. And he did very well at leading the congregation through a time of major change when many congregations, there were splits and people leaving, and he was, the bishops praised his work in the diocese, and when he left, he left the parish in a strong condition for the future. The vacancy after Bob Howell left was the first one in our history where the current search process was followed. It had not been in existence at the time of earlier changes. And Bob retired in December, and by spring the search committee was appointed, of which I was a member, and the special service commissioning the members was held on Pentecost. And the chair of the search committee was a woman, Nancy Brooker, who had previously served on the vestry, and the committee was about half and half men and women. I was one of the members. And George Hull was named the acting rector, and he continued things pretty much as they had been, but there were two items of note. The columbarium was dedicated in his tenure. The room that had not been used for much of anything as the stairway leading up to the carillon, and the columbarium was dedicated, I think, a few months after George Hull came. And the other thing he made a point of doing was introducing the Easter Vigil, which Bob Howell had not used. And he said he did not think, he thought that the congregation should do this once, and that it should not be totally left for the new rector to introduce. And in order to get the largest possible attendance, he scheduled it at a time which he said he knew was not liturgically perhaps the best. He had it in the late afternoon, like 4 or 4:30 p.m., but he said, I want to have people feel that the church school families feel that they can bring their children to it, and it won't be too late. He received a call to St. Mark's Church in Barrington Hills shortly before Ray Webster was to come. He had called and accepted the call, but was not going to come for a month or so. And he had served at St. Chrysostom's for over 11 years, which is longer than many of our rectors. And St. Mark's had been had some difficulties, I'm not quite sure what, but he completely turned the parish around, and he retired from there a few years ago and is now serving as part-time assistant at Holy Comforter in Kenilworth. He's been very active in the Chiapas ministry and has come on many trips with the St. Chrysostom's group there, and being in the area has been able to keep up ties to friends at St. Chrysostom's.